One of my favorite Lazaris programs I just listened to is my audio version of the forgiveness video on self-forgiveness that Lazaris did. And my favorite parts are, the exuberance, definitely the meditations, the exuberance, the flower gathering, the transcendence and merging, and then my favorite part of all, the old man, and the sense of love in the old man, the archetype of generous loving that I don't relate to experiencing from human beings. And so it's a really sacred impregnation of that archetype that every human being longs for, to be accepted, to be loved, to be seen. And that is, in my experience, just incredibly fleeting, fragile, and rare among human beings and human animals. And so it's, anyway, that's definitely the highlight. The counterpoint of that, in terms of the area I have felt dread, hesitation, cringing a little bit around, that is the repeat cycle, meaning just, over and over and over again. I've probably listened to the forgiveness, tape, I don't know, somewhere around 50 times, somewhere around that, maybe more. And I think that, the bit that feels fragile, is the investment in any technology, any relationship is very much a spiral, right? So you invest more and more and more, right? And if it doesn't live up, meaning I don't think I've experienced, I'd say maybe a 10% shift in the probability field coming out of that forgiveness work. When I recreate the positive future out of it, maybe 10% or 5% of that manifests, somewhere, I'm sure it's somewhere between, 1 and 10%. But the fragility is, why the gap? Why the gap? Like, what am I, if I get excited about a dramatic change and it doesn't happen, what does that mean, right? Does that mean, Lazaris is full of shit? Does that mean I'm not doing it good enough? Does that mean I can't trust Lazaris? So it's a fragile thing when there's this huge gap, and I would say it's one of the biggest critiques that I make in general about the hyper inflation of probability that Lazaris presents. Because if Lazaris presented and said, here's this wonderful opportunity, and for some of you, there may be little or no change at all, and, you can tell, but it's still a wonderful experience. For others, you may be in a place where you can make a couple of different shifts. Some of you might be in a position to make, a pivot that will kind of depend on where you are in life, what your reserves are, how much you're, capable of believing, but anything along that line is wonderful. A beautiful hour rather than an hour asleep, a beautiful realization rather than no realization. That there's a whole continuum of positive stuff out of here, and anything on that is great. And so, that type of language, one, reflects my experience and my awareness of the probability field that I see in the Lazaris community, but also I think it protects against this thing of why am I still doing it? And that's another thing. Like, if I'm doing it again, does that mean that, that I didn't do it right? Does that mean I'm foolish for doing something again and again? Because that is the definition of foolishness or insanity. You just keep, doing the same thing, and this time you expect it to be different. And maybe there's cold. I haven't done cryotherapy. Maybe there's this or that could be actually having a big difference, and I'm just foolishly doing this same thing. So I'd say that's the area of fragility. And so, for me, it's enough, to experience a bubble of, 5 to 10 minutes of a 10,000% explosion in the awareness of, that seed of love and that gift from the old man for 5 to 10 minutes. And, within, I don't know, 20 minutes of, getting up and going on with my day, I'm back into anxiety about this, or paranoia about that, or hesitation and uncertainty about this, but that 10 minutes is a part of my life, right? That, for 10 minutes, a sense of abundant love, a sense of, joy, which makes that an intelligent choice, as long as it doesn't subsequently lead to a story that, I'm foolish, et cetera, because those stories tend to last longer than the experience. And I think that's the vulnerability. The story we make up about what did and didn't work lasts indefinitely until we create, a different story. And without dialogue, which is my biggest critique of a monologue type relationship with anyone, including Lazaris, without dialogue, the risk is in a less than optimal story, meaning a story that we then pull ourselves down to be consistent with. That's the real risk, is that narrative. And it is difficult, I think, to create constructive narratives about not having, radically good things happen when Lazaris has this overlay of it's easier to succeed than it is to fail, that, the whole universe wants to succeed, but you're working tirelessly to fail and all that, and it's all your payoffs and all this. So when there's, this wonderful thing, and then, 20 minutes later, I don't really see much difference in my identity. Well, rather than pulling myself down with that awareness, I find it useful to say, well, that's Lazaris's story that doesn't show up in a lot of reality, including Jach or, anyone else. And that's just Lazaris's story about it. But my story is, when I do this, I feel great enjoyment doing it for the joy of doing it and being it for that, for that period of time. And of course, that helps the body during that period, mentally, emotionally, physically. There's a kind of a cleansing. So that's one thing. The other thing that I would say is that my understanding of trauma, PTSD, and complex PTSD memories stored in the body is that this must be worked with somatically, and requires, its own technology and language, and that certain things cannot be really released and alchemized without being presenced in the body at those levels of pain or helplessness, and that requires help. It requires different technology than the technology optimized for a Lazaris seminar. But it is a barrier, meaning, the parts of me that are sociopathic because they're numb, because they're frozen in states of helplessness, extreme pain, extreme shame, in a cult where nobody knows how to respond to that. And nobody has responded effectively to that, right? It's difficult to have change in a block of ice, right? It first must be thawed and felt, right? Those parts have to wake up again in order to, experience the probability field of real alchemy. And that work is, the cult has barely touched it. Lazaris has barely touched it. It's fragile work. Perhaps we'll be in a place in 100 years as a species where we can prevent significant amounts of trauma, respond to the trauma we cause in infancy and childhood, heal trauma as adolescents and as grown-ups, and thus facilitate the probability field of becoming an adult, which is quite iffy in our cult. Tons of grown-ups who are not adults, and tons of people who are adults in this little area, but a regressed child in this other area. So those are my integration or integrative thoughts around the self-forgiveness video.